My name is Charlotte Bennett, and I'm 32 years old. 3 days ago, I buried my mother. Even now, saying those words aloud doesn't make them feel real. 14 months of hospital rooms, chemotherapy appointments, whispered conversations with specialists, and fragile moments where hope rose and disappeared just as quickly. Then, one quiet afternoon, with my hand wrapped around hers, she took her final breath. People say grief arrives like a wave. They're wrong. It settles into your bones, like winter, making every ordinary moment feel colder than it used to. My mother had raised me alone after my father walked away when I was 6 years old. She never spoke badly about him. She simply worked 3 jobs, countless sleepless nights, sacrifices I didn't fully appreciate until I was old enough to understand what exhaustion really looked like. She wasn't wealthy, or so I believed. She drove the same aging sedan for over a decade, lived in the modest house I'd grown up in, bought clothes only when the old ones wore out, and somehow still found time to provide free legal services to families who couldn't afford attorneys. She had retired from corporate law years earlier, but retirement never slowed her down. Instead, she poured her life into nonprofit organizations, community outreach, and helping strangers who would never be able to repay her. That was simply who she was. Kindness wasn't something she performed, it was who she became. For the past 4 years, I'd been dating my boyfriend, Ethan Walker. We'd been engaged for 8 months, at least. That's what everyone believed our future looked like. Ethan was successful, ambitious, and endlessly driven. He worked as a senior account manager at a marketing firm where every conversation somehow circled back to campaigns, clients, networking opportunities, or promotion. I used to admire that passion. I convinced myself his intensity balanced my quieter personality. I worked in IT consulting, mostly from home, and preferred evenings with coffee and movies over crowded networking events. We were different. I thought different could work. Looking back now, I realize I ignored dozens of warning signs because love has a remarkable way of translating selfishness into stress. Everything changed after Mom got sick. At first, Ethan acted supportive. He came to the hospital once, brought flowers, held my hand. But compassion has an expiration date when it's only being performed. As the months dragged on, little comments began slipping out. Another hospital visit. You're spending the entire weekend there again. When is this ever going to end? He never shouted, never exploded. Instead, it was worse. Sighs, eye rolls, checking his phone while I talked about test results, changing the subject whenever I mentioned Mom's condition. Every individual moment seemed too small to fight over. Together, they painted a picture I refused to see. The night Mom died, I called Ethan from the hospital parking lot. I was barely able to breathe through my tears. "She's gone," I whispered. There was silence. Then his voice came through the phone. "Oh, Charlotte. That's awful." For one tiny second, I thought he understood. Then he continued, "I'm actually walking into a meeting right now. Can we really talk tonight?" I stared at the hospital entrance. People walked in carrying flowers. Others walked out crying. Meanwhile, my fiancé couldn't spare more than 20 seconds. "Sure," I answered quietly. He came home that evening. I waited. Surely now he'd comfort me. Instead, he spent 45 uninterrupted minutes complaining about an impossible client, office politics, and how exhausted he was preparing for his company's annual charity gala. 45 minutes. Only after emptying every frustration from his own day did he finally glance toward me. "So, how are you holding up?" By then, I was too emotionally numb to answer honestly. "I'm fine." It was easier. The funeral was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. Unfortunately, or perhaps inevitably, Ethan's company's biggest annual charity gala was scheduled that very same evening. He'd been talking about that gala for months. Important donors, executives, potential promotions. His boss had specifically asked him to bring me because several technology executives would be attending Thursday morning. He sat across from me at the kitchen table. He folded his hands together like someone preparing a business proposal. "I've been thinking." I looked up. "The funeral starts at 2. I nodded. "The gala starts at 7. Another nod. He smiled slightly. "I don't think you can realistically do both." For a moment, I genuinely wondered if I'd misunderstood him. "The gala. It's the biggest event of our year," he explained patiently. "My boss wants us there together. These are the kinds of connections that shape careers. My mother's funeral is Saturday." "I know." He leaned forward. "But funerals are about closure." I blinked. "You can find closure another way." I said nothing. He kept talking. "Visit the cemetery next week. Have a private moment. Your mom would want you thinking about your future." "Our future?" I finally found my voice. "You want me to miss my mother's funeral? I'm asking you to be strategic. My mother is dead." "I know." His tone remained almost annoyingly calm. "But she's already gone." The words hit harder than any scream could have. He wasn't trying to comfort me. He was negotiating. As if grief were simply another calendar conflict. "I'm going to my mother's funeral." His jaw tightened. "Fine." He stood. "I'll attend the gala alone." Then he added something I'll never forget. "But don't blame me later if my career suffers, because you couldn't support me during the most important night of my professional life." He grabbed his keys and left. The apartment felt impossibly quiet afterward. I sat at the kitchen table for nearly an hour, staring at nothing. Then, sometime that afternoon, my phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Been thinking, you should really skip the funeral. My work gala is more important for our future. Your mom is gone, either way. The gala matters." I read it once, then again, then maybe 8 more times. My hands trembled, not with sadness anymore, but disbelief. Finally, I took a screenshot. Something inside me had shifted, without fully understanding why. I wanted proof. I typed only 4 words. "You're right. Priorities matter." Seconds later, he replied with a heart emoji. He thought he'd won. He had absolutely no idea that 2 days earlier, I'd already sat inside my mother's estate attorney's office. And he certainly had no idea that my mother's decades of quiet charitable work were deeply connected to the single biggest client keeping his company alive. He believed Saturday night would define his future. In a way, he was right. Saturday arrived beneath a gray sky that seemed determined to hold back rain. The weather matched how I felt: heavy, quiet, exhausted. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, fastening the small pearl earrings my mother had given me when I graduated from college. "They're not expensive," she laughed back then, "but they'll remind you that elegance has nothing to do with price." I wore them to every important moment afterward. Job interviews, our engagement dinner, now her funeral. The drive to the funeral home passed in silence. No music, no podcasts, just the rhythmic sound of the tires rolling over wet pavement and memories replaying themselves without mercy. The first bicycle she bought me, after saving for months. The nights she'd stayed awake helping me study. The mornings she'd kissed my forehead before leaving for one of her 3 jobs. the day I got engaged, the last conversation we had, while she was still strong enough to smile. I just want you to be loved the way you deserve. At the time, I'd squeezed her hand and smiled. I already am. Looking back, I wonder if she wanted to argue. Instead, she simply nodded. The funeral chapel was already full when I arrived. Family members embraced me, one after another. Friends, former co-workers, neighbors, people I had never met before. Every single one of them carried a story. One elderly woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "Your mother helped my daughter keep custody of her children." She smiled sadly. "We couldn't afford a lawyer. She refused to accept a single dollar." Another man introduced himself as a veteran. "I was about to lose my home after a paperwork mistake." He shook his head. "Your mom spent 6 weekends fixing everything." When I asked how much I owed her, she said. He laughed through his tears. "Just promise you'll help somebody else someday." Story after story unfolded. A young teacher, a single father, an immigrant family, a foster mother. Each of them described a version of my mother I'd only partly known. I had always thought of her as generous. I hadn't realized just how many lives she had quietly carried on her shoulders. The service itself passed in a blur. When it was my turn to speak, I stood before everyone with trembling hands. I spent my entire life believing my mother was ordinary. My voice cracked. I've learned this week that ordinary people don't leave behind hundreds of grateful strangers. They leave behind families. My mother left behind an entire community. I paused, fighting tears. She taught me that kindness isn't something you perform when people are watching. It's something you become. The room fell silent. Several people were crying openly. I looked toward the back of the chapel, almost instinctively. A foolish part of me still expected Ethan to walk through the doors, to apologize, to realize how wrong he'd been, but the doors never opened. His seat remained empty. Later, I learned why. Around that exact time, he had been sitting in an expensive salon, having his hair professionally styled before the gala. Not once that morning had he texted. Not once had he asked how I was doing. Not once had he wondered whether I needed him. The funeral ended shortly after 4 o'clock. Instead of returning home, our immediate family gathered in a conference room inside my mother's attorney's office. The will reading had been scheduled immediately afterward, because my mother had insisted everyone already be together. The attorney greeting us was Margaret Collins, one of Mom's closest friends, and a retired corporate attorney herself. She smiled sadly when she saw me. "Your mother planned every detail. Even this." Most of the will unfolded exactly as everyone expected. The house came to me. Her old sedan went to my younger cousin, Emily, who had just earned her driver's license. Several family members received modest financial gifts. 3 nonprofit organizations received generous donations. Everything seemed simple. Then Margaret opened another folder. Charlotte. She looked directly at me. There is one additional asset. She slid several documents across the table. For nearly 30 years, your mother quietly invested almost every extra dollar she earned. I frowned. Invested. Margaret nodded. She lived well below her means. She rarely spent money on herself. She believed compound interest was one of life's greatest miracles. She smiled softly. The investment portfolio is currently valued at approximately. She glanced down once more. $2.3 million. The room froze. Someone inhaled sharply. My aunt actually covered her mouth. I simply stared. I couldn't process the number. 2.3 million. My mother, my practical, humble, old car-driving mother, had quietly built extraordinary wealth while never changing the way she lived. Margaret continued. Half of the portfolio has already been transferred into a charitable trust, according to her wishes. The remaining $1.15 million belongs to you. I didn't speak. Couldn't. Then Margaret picked up one final envelope. Your mother also left you something else. A personal statement. She unfolded the letter carefully. The room became perfectly still. She began reading. To my beloved daughter. My chest tightened immediately. If you're hearing this, then I finally stopped worrying about pain. Several relatives quietly wiped away tears. Everything I've built was never about money. It was about giving you choices I never had. I lowered my eyes. Mom, there is one request I hope you'll consider. Margaret paused before continuing. If, at the time of my passing, you are still in your current relationship, I ask that you take time before making any permanent commitments. The room became noticeably quieter. I have watched that relationship with growing concern. My heartbeat accelerated. The man beside you is intelligent and ambitious. But I have never been fully convinced that he treasures your heart more than your usefulness. I felt every pair of eyes slowly turn toward me. Margaret continued gently. A partner should show up during life's hardest moments. Love is measured most clearly in seasons of grief. If someone cannot stand beside you now, they will not stand beside you later. Tears rolled silently down my face. You deserve someone who chooses you before convenience. Someone who sees your worth even when there is nothing to gain. If I'm wrong, I will gladly accept that from heaven. But if I'm right, please don't spend your future trying to earn love that should already be freely given. The letter ended simply, I love you. Always. Silence. No one spoke. My aunt reached over and squeezed my hand. Across the table, my uncle slowly nodded. As though he'd been carrying this knowledge for years, I suddenly remembered dozens of conversations with Mom, questions she'd asked. Are you happy? Does Ethan make you feel safe? Does he listen when you talk? At the time, I'd laughed them off. She hadn't been criticizing him. She'd been trying to protect me. When the meeting ended, I stepped outside alone. The evening air felt cooler now. For several minutes, I simply stood beneath the courthouse awning, staring at my phone. Then, I searched for one particular contact, Victoria Hayes. She and my mother had worked together for nearly a decade on the Regional Children's Literacy Foundation. After Mom's passing, Victoria had become the organization's new board chair. She answered on the second ring. Charlotte. Her voice immediately softened. How are you holding up? I don't know. I don't think I actually know. We all loved your mother. I swallowed. I need to tell you something. For nearly 20 minutes, I explained everything. The hospital visits, the eye rolls, the funeral, the text, the gala, the message telling me to skip saying goodbye to my own mother because networking mattered more. Victoria never interrupted. When I finished, she sighed. Your mother worried this day would come. I closed my eyes. She talked to you many times, but she refused to interfere. She believed people eventually reveal themselves, and she wanted you to discover the truth on your own. I looked toward the darkening sky. I finally did. Victoria hesitated. There's something you should know. Our board has been discussing whether to terminate our marketing contract. My attention sharpened. Ethan's company. Yes. We've become increasingly uncomfortable. The campaigns have focused more on impressing corporate sponsors than helping children. We plan to revisit the contract after the leadership transition. Another long silence. Then she asked quietly, what do you want to happen? I didn't answer immediately. Revenge. No, nothing could bring my mother back. Nothing could erase what Ethan had chosen. But truth deserved to exist. I don't want anyone lying for him. I don't want anyone protecting him. I just want people to know exactly who he chose to be." Victoria was quiet for several seconds. Finally, she spoke. "Then perhaps his employer deserves to know the values being represented by the person managing our account." I closed my eyes. My mother's words echoed once again. A partner should show up during life's hardest moments. When I opened them again, my decision was made. Do it. Neither of us realized just how dramatically that single sentence would reshape Ethan's future before the night was over. While I drove home wearing the same black dress I'd cried in all afternoon, Ethan was preparing for what he believed would be the biggest night of his career. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. I sat alone in my apartment, with my mother's folded memorial program resting on the coffee table. He stood in front of a full-length mirror, adjusting the cuffs of a tailored navy tuxedo. I poured myself a cup of tea I never drank. He carefully fastened an expensive watch he'd purchased after receiving his last bonus. I stared at a framed photograph of my mother smiling beside the ocean. He admired his reflection. We were living through two entirely different worlds on the same Saturday evening. The charity gala was being held inside the city's most prestigious downtown hotel. Crystal chandeliers hung from impossibly high ceilings. Live string music drifted through the ballroom. Servers in white gloves carried silver trays filled with champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. Everything shimmered with polished elegance. For Ethan, nights like this were intoxicating. He knew nearly everyone. He smiled easily, shook hands confidently, laughed at jokes that weren't funny, complimented executives, remembered spouses' names, asked about recent vacations. He had mastered the art of making every conversation sound genuine. From a distance, he looked like exactly the kind of man people wanted, representing their company. His supervisor, Daniel Brooks, spotted him near the entrance. "There you are." Daniel looked around. "Where's Charlotte?" For only a fraction of a second, Ethan hesitated. Then he smiled. "Family emergency." Daniel frowned slightly. "I'm sorry to hear that. It couldn't be avoided." "I understand." The answer satisfied him, at least for the moment. Ethan relaxed. He believed the hardest question of the evening was already behind him. He had no idea what was walking through the ballroom doors. At approximately 8:30, conversations around the room subtly shifted. People straightened. Several executives quietly moved toward the entrance. The newly appointed chair of the Regional Children's Literacy Foundation had arrived. Victoria Hayes, elegant, composed, respected by nearly everyone in attendance. Many donors greeted her warmly. Board members surrounded her. Photographers snapped pictures. She smiled politely through each introduction, thanking supporters for attending. Eventually, Daniel approached her with a welcoming handshake. "Victoria, so glad you could make it. I almost didn't." She smiled faintly. "But I thought tonight was important." "It certainly is. We're excited to continue strengthening our partnership." Victoria held his gaze for a moment. "Actually, I was hoping we could speak privately." Daniel's confident expression barely changed. "Of course." They disappeared into a nearby conference room. The door closed behind them. Outside, the party continued. No one noticed anything unusual. Music played. Wine flowed. Donors chatted. Auction items were displayed beneath soft lighting. Ethan continued networking, completely unaware that the most important conversation of the evening wasn't happening in the ballroom. It was happening behind a closed door. For nearly 20 minutes, inside that room, Victoria calmly explained everything. She spoke about organizational values, about compassion, about integrity, about leadership. Then, she shared the screenshots. The exact words Ethan had sent. "Skip your mom's funeral. My work gala is more important." She explained who Charlotte Bennett was. She explained who Charlotte's mother had been. She explained that the woman buried only hours earlier had spent years serving as chair of the foundation. Finally, she explained why the board no longer believed Ethan's company reflected the values they wanted representing children. Daniel read the screenshots once, then again. His face slowly lost all color. When the meeting ended, he thanked Victoria quietly. She simply nodded. No anger. No dramatic speeches. Only disappointment. Sometimes disappointment is far heavier than outrage. Daniel walked back into the ballroom, looking 10 years older. He searched until he found Ethan, laughing with 2 potential donors. Ethan. His voice was unusually flat. I need you. Now. The smile disappeared from Ethan's face. Everything okay? Conference room. They walked together without another word. Once the door closed, Daniel turned toward him. The foundation has terminated our contract. Ethan blinked. I'm sorry. What? Effective immediately. He laughed nervously. That can't be right. It is. But why? Daniel stared directly into his eyes. Because of you. Silence. I don't understand. The foundation's new chair just informed me that the former chair. He paused. The woman who passed away this week was your fiancé's mother. Ethan's stomach tightened. Daniel continued. She also showed me something. He placed printed screenshots on the table. Ethan looked down. His own messages stared back at him. His own words. His own heart emoji. His own cruelty. His breathing became shallow. Daniel spoke quietly. Did you tell Charlotte to skip her mother's funeral so she could attend this gala? Ethan swallowed. It wasn't like that. Daniel didn't respond. Instead, he slid another page across the table. The screenshot enlarged. Impossible to deny. Your mom is gone either way. The gala matters. The room became painfully quiet. Finally, Daniel asked, Is this real? Ethan rubbed both hands across his face. I was under pressure. I wasn't thinking. I didn't literally mean. Daniel interrupted him. You sent it. Yes. You expected her to come? You thought networking mattered more than burying her mother. Ethan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Daniel slowly leaned back. Do you understand what happened tonight? Our largest client. 40% of our annual revenue. Gone? He pointed toward the screenshots. Because this is who they now believe represents our company. Tears began filling Ethan's eyes. I'm sorry. I can explain. I'll call Charlotte. I'll fix this. Daniel shook his head. This isn't about fixing anything. This is about character. And right now, I'm not sure I recognize yours. Word spread faster than anyone expected. Conference room doors always attract attention. Employees noticed Daniel's expression. Board members whispered. Someone from finance overheard part of the conversation. Within 30 minutes, rumors had begun traveling across the ballroom. People glanced toward Ethan. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked uncomfortable. A few quietly avoided him altogether. He suddenly felt isolated inside a room filled with hundreds of people. The same networking event he'd considered essential now felt impossibly small. He left before dessert was served. The first phone call reached me at 8:57 p.m. I didn't answer. The second came less than 2 minutes later, then another, and another. By the 10th call, I placed my phone face down on the table. Around midnight, I finally listened to the voicemails. The first sounded shaken. Charlotte, I just found out what happened. Please call me. I know you're angry. We can fix this. The second was louder. Why would you do this? You went behind my back. You embarrassed me. My entire company knows. The third sounded desperate. I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking. I've been stressed. I never wanted any of this. The fourth was almost hysterical. You've destroyed everything. My career, my reputation, my future. There was a pause. Then his voice cracked. Please. I love you. I need you. I almost deleted them. Instead, I saved every single one. Something told me they weren't finished. I was right. At doishaptea. M. Another voicemail arrived. This one sounded different. No tears. No apologies. Only bitterness. You know what? You wanted revenge. You got it. I hope you're happy. Another long silence. Then he said the one sentence that erased any remaining doubt inside me. I bet your dead mother would be proud of what you've become. I closed my eyes. The apartment became perfectly still. I replayed the message. Not because I wanted to hear it again. Because I wanted a permanent copy. Then I took another screenshot, another recording, another piece of evidence. For 4 years, I had kept explaining Ethan's behavior away. Stress, pressure, deadlines, career anxiety. Now there was nothing left to explain. Grief doesn't change people. It reveals them. That night, while sitting alone in the apartment where we'd once planned our future together, I finally accepted something I'd been avoiding for months. I hadn't lost my relationship because of one phone call. I'd lost it long before my mother died. Her funeral had simply exposed the truth 5 days later. The consequences were only beginning 5 days after the gala. My life looked completely different. Grief still greeted me every morning. I'd wake up for a split second, believing I should call my mom to tell her about my day before remembering there was no one on the other end of that phone anymore. That pain hadn't faded. It probably wouldn't for a long time. But another feeling had quietly taken its place beside it. Clarity. The fog I'd lived inside for years had finally lifted. On Monday morning, I received a brief text from one of Ethan's coworkers. He's been placed on administrative leave. HR pulled him into a meeting first thing this morning. Everyone knows why. I stared at the message for several seconds before setting my phone down. I felt no excitement, no satisfaction, only sadness. Not because of what had happened to Ethan, because I suddenly realized how many chances he'd been given to become a better man and how consistently he'd chosen not to. Before leaving for work that morning, I'd already called a locksmith. By lunchtime, every lock on my apartment had been replaced. The engagement photos hanging near the hallway disappeared into a cardboard box. His clothes were folded neatly into storage bins. Everything that belonged to him was stacked beside the front door. I wasn't acting out of anger anymore. I was preparing for reality. Tuesday evening, reality knocked. Or rather, it pounded. Charlotte. Boom, boom, boom. I know you're in there. The pounding echoed through the hallway. We need to talk. I walked quietly to the door, but didn't unlock it. I'm listening. There was an audible sigh of relief. Thank God. Please. Open the door. No. A long pause. You can't seriously be ending our engagement like this. I'm ending it because you already ended it. I made one mistake. I closed my eyes. No. You made hundreds. This was simply the first one I finally refused to ignore. His breathing became heavier. I was under pressure. I told you that. My career was on the line. My mother had just died. Silence. I know. No. You know the words. You still don't understand what they mean. Another pause. I'm sorry. Were you sorry when you sent the text? Were you sorry while getting your hair done during my mother's funeral? Nothing. Were you sorry when you spent 45 minutes complaining about work before asking whether I was okay after she died? Still nothing. Finally, he whispered, I didn't realize. Exactly. You didn't. You never realized. Because you never stopped thinking about yourself long enough to notice anyone else's pain. His voice broke. I love you. The words felt strangely unfamiliar now. You loved what I did for you. What I represented? The stable relationship. The supportive partner. The woman who always understood. But love? I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. Love doesn't ask someone to skip saying goodbye to her mother. Another long silence settled between us. Eventually, he spoke again. So that's it. Yes. We're done. His footsteps remained outside the apartment for another minute. Then they slowly disappeared. I thought that was the end. I was wrong. About an hour later, someone knocked again. This time it was slower, sharper, more deliberate. When I looked through the peephole, I saw Ethan's mother, Linda Walker. She folded her arms the moment I spoke through the door. Charlotte, we need to have a mature conversation. I'm comfortable right here. You've completely destroyed my son's career. No, I didn't. You absolutely did. If you hadn't called that woman, I called a family friend. I told the truth. The rest wasn't my decision. Linda scoffed loudly. You're hiding behind technicalities. No. I'm standing behind facts. My son made one bad decision. I couldn't help answering immediately. He made years of bad decisions. This was simply the first one with witnesses. Her voice rose. People say terrible things under stress. I know. My mother was dying. I never once asked him to abandon the people he loved. She fell silent. Then she tried another approach. You owe him an apology. For what? For ruining his future. I leaned closer to the door. Your son told me my mother's funeral mattered less than a networking event. He chose his future over my grief. The consequences belonged to him, not me. Her tone became icy. Will sue. I almost smiled. For what? Defamation. I never lied. Tortious interference. I never told anyone what decision to make. I simply answered questions honestly. She muttered something under her breath. Then she raised her voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear. You're manipulative. You're vindictive. You're a narcissist. One apartment door opened farther down the hallway. An elderly neighbor looked out. Everything okay over here? I smiled politely. Yes. It'll be over in a minute. He looked from me to Linda. If not, I'll call security. Linda glared one last time before storming toward the elevator. The hallway finally became quiet again. Wednesday afternoon. Another message arrived. This one surprised me. It was from Ethan's closest friend, Ryan. He asked if we could meet at a nearby coffee shop. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Ryan looked exhausted when he arrived. He wrapped both hands around a coffee cup before speaking. He's falling apart. I remained silent. He knows he messed up. Does he? Ryan nodded. I think so. I've known Ethan since college. I've never seen him like this. He may lose everything. I looked out the window. He already had everything. He just didn't recognize it. Ryan Sahil, couldn't this have stayed between the two of you? I met his eyes. I never intended for it to become public. But you knew telling Victoria would have consequences. I knew there might be. I also knew I wasn't willing to protect him from the truth anymore. Ryan leaned back. That sounds cold. So does asking someone to skip her mother's funeral. He opened his mouth, then quietly closed it again. There wasn't really anything left to argue. The following morning, an envelope arrived from a law firm. Ethan had actually hired an attorney. The letter demanded 3 things: $15,000 in alleged economic damages for interfering with his employment, the return of the engagement ring, and a written apology admitting responsibility for his professional losses. I read the entire letter twice before laughing for the first time in weeks. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. My mother's estate attorney, Margaret Collins, had already offered to represent me if anything happened. She read the demand letter without changing her expression. Then she smiled. "This won't take long." Her response was devastatingly simple. Every statement Charlotte Bennett made was truthful. She exercised her legal right to discuss her own personal experiences with a longtime family friend. Any independent business decisions made by third parties cannot legally be attributed to her. As for the engagement ring, under state law, gifts given in contemplation of marriage are not recoverable when the marriage fails because of the donor's own egregious misconduct. Finally, the letter politely advised Ethan's attorney to encourage his client to cease further contact. We never received another demand. 2 days later, another former coworker called me. Ethan was fired. I listened quietly. It wasn't only the foundation. What do you mean? Once HR started investigating, they found other issues. Expense reports that had been inflated, junior employees whose ideas he'd presented as his own, promises made to clients that couldn't actually be delivered. Nothing individually catastrophic, but together, they revealed a pattern. The foundation account hadn't destroyed his career. It had simply caused people to finally look closely. Over the next several weeks, I heard countless versions of the story. According to Ethan, I had manipulated powerful connections. I couldn't tolerate an ambitious man. I had sabotaged his future out of spite. People who actually knew me didn't believe him. Those who did probably never knew either of us in the first place. Eventually, I stopped caring. Some reputations aren't worth defending. The $1.15 million inheritance remained exactly where my mother had left it, untouched. I wasn't in a hurry. That money represented decades of sacrifice. Late nights, careful budgeting, missed vacations, old cars driven long past their expiration date. It wasn't just wealth. It was love transformed into opportunity. Every time I looked at the account balance, I thought less about what I could buy and more about what my mother had truly given me. Freedom. The freedom to never stay with someone out of fear. The freedom to choose peace over appearances. The freedom to build a future with someone who would never ask me to sacrifice the people I love for professional convenience. I still miss her every single day. Sometimes I catch myself reaching for my phone to tell her something funny before remembering she isn't there. Sometimes I dream about hearing her laugh. Sometimes I still cry in the grocery store when I pass her favorite brand of tea. Grief doesn't disappear. It simply learns to live beside you. There are nights when I still wonder whether one phone call changed too many lives. Then I remember the text message, "Skip your mom's funeral. My work gala is more important." I remember the voicemail that insulted my mother's memory. I remember every hospital visit he treated like an inconvenience. And I realized something that took me far too long to understand. I never ruined Ethan's life. I stopped shielding him from the consequences of the life he chose to live. My mother saw the truth before I did. She never demanded that I leave him. She simply trusted that, eventually, character reveals itself. She was right. People always tell you who they are. The mistake is believing they'll become someone else. As for me, I'm slowly rebuilding. One quiet morning, one difficult memory, one hopeful step at a time. And every time life asks me to choose what truly matters, I hear my mother's voice reminding me of the lesson she left behind. Priorities matter. Just make sure your priorities never cost you the people who love you most.